to infinity and beyond.
This is me. This is how I win.
Were you rushing or were you dragging? Answer!
You're a wizard, Harry.
Say what again? Say what again? I dare you.
No, I am your father.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back inside the film room. Zach Owens here with Johnny Sobchak for the most anticipated episode of the last 2 years, we'll say, because it is Dune Part 2. We are here. Denis Villeneuve has blessed us once again, and we've got the Muad'Dib, Lisan Al-Gaib, Shai Hulud himself. Johnny, you're the Dune master, the Dune expert here, so I am so excited to pick your brain, hear your thoughts, and just hear everything you have to say about this movie, because I know it's special to you.
Wow, it's very flattering, Zach. I feel like with that kind of fanaticism, I could lead you into a holy war if I wanted to.
It wouldn't be hard. You've got the Dune fandom right behind you. They're at your back.
But thanks, Zach. Yeah, this is definitely. I mean, it's not very often that a movie comes around that's this anticipated and this exciting, and spoiler alert, this good. So we'll be
I don't know if that's a spoiler, man. I think everybody's knew that at this point.
But yeah, really excited. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I think it'll be a good conversation. And you know, we won't waste too much time here, but I would like to hear what we've had going on other than obsessing over Dune Part 2, obviously.
I don't want to mislead you there, Johnny, because on our little Google Doc under what's going on, it says Zach is obsessed. Yes, that is very clearly about Dune Part 2. We all know that. Johnny's obsessed as well. But there's a sub meaning here.
Ooh.
I'm at a crossroads because I have been nonstop thinking about Dune since I left the theater on Sunday night. More on that later. But I'm also in the midst, or have now, as of this morning, just finished. I had texted you guys in the group. I've been in a big reading phase this year. I've always been a reader,
Yes.
like, you know, maybe like, I don't know, 8-9 books on the year. I just finished number 5, and we're in February still.
Moly.
So I'm cranking. But the last
Incredible.
2, I've gone fully headfirst into. I know this is a movie and TV podcast. You'll see the connection here. It's not a book podcast, but I'm fully invested in the Empyrean series, which is, the first book is Fourth Wing, the second book, which I finished this morning, is Iron Flame. And like, I just need to get it out there. Like, people are obsessing over this. Like,
I've never heard of this.
the second book came out in November. It was like, it blew up on like on TikTok, on Book Talk, as like the next big thing. You'd probably recognize at least the cover just from like going into a bookstore or any like Target media store. It's like the first one is like a shiny gold cover. But it's like, the way I pitched it to you guys, and it's a pretty spot on, is that it's like a fantasy story, but it's like the Hunger Games meets Game of Thrones meets Harry Potter, in the sense that like, it's like the more stylistically like Hunger Games, I feel like, as far as like the subject matter, but then it's the Game of Thrones, like there's the whole premise is like they're dragon riders. So it's like that fantastical world, and like the brutality of it, like nobody's safe, anybody can die, the like excessive violence of it. And then the Harry Potter element is like the main characters, it's like late teen who's like entering college, and it's like, so that's like the academic setting of like a Harry Potter type. But
Okay.
it was a very like I feel like now in my adult reading career, I'm like very into like mysteries or like sci-fi. And so I think this like very much hit like a childhood like
Yeah.
fantasy itch from like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, Hunger Games, like those sort of like dystopian or fantasy type books. But the connection
Mhm.
here um, is that it will be made into a show. Amazon has already procured the rights.
Oh, okay.
Michael B. Jordan's production company is like attached with Amazon. Um, so I think that's about the extent of the information so far. But this is the second book came out in November. There's going to be 5 books in the series, so we've still got a long ways to go. But I'm very excited. I'm obsessed with these books. I don't know, the next one doesn't have a date yet. We'll see, maybe late this year, but I'm all in on this, and I can't wait for, maybe on episode 300 when we're finally talking about the series premiere of this show. But I would recommend it for anyone out there who likes any of those things: Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Hunger Games, just fantasy in general. It's a good one.
Okay, okay. No, I mean, I feel like it's hard not to get like kind of lost or like bogged down with all the different fantasy, dystopian, YA and not and non-YA genre books
It's
and
the
series.
it's interesting because like it's I feel like when I was talking about like scratching the itch is that it's like it feels young adult, like it feels like YA, but it is like for adults. But it's like
Okay.
kind of like the I don't want to say like it's not cheesy, but like you know what I'm talking about, like the like certain
Yeah.
the like very certain like targeted for young adults, like those sort of books that like this is just like a version of that for like 20s and 30s basically, it seems like.
Okay. Gotcha. That makes sense. Um, huh. Maybe I'll have to look into. I am I am in terms of reading, I will say I started at New Year's. I really wanted to finish Dune, the original novel, before I wanted to start it and finish it before the movie came out. Um, but then I ended up getting to see the movie. When I saw the movie for the first time, which happened to be early, which came up on like short notice, and it was over a week early, I had about 100 pages left, or like just over 100 pages. So I didn't get a chance to finish it. And now, since I've seen the movie and because I've been thinking so much about it and writing and talking about it online and whatnot, I just have not been like fixed and locked in to finish the book. I have it down to about 80 or 70 pages. So once we hop off this tonight, I am going to buckle down and try to finish it tonight. If not tonight, then definitely tomorrow, because I want to go from that right into Dune Messiah, which will be my second time reading
Mm-hmm.
Messiah. I've read the first novel like 2 or 3 times now. And then for the first time, I want to read Children of Dune because I got the trilogy like box set last year. So that's my plan for reading for probably the foreseeable future, probably going through like the springtime. Because I'm a much less voracious reader than you are, Zach.
Well,
But I'm
it's
trying
so
to keep up with
weird.
you.
It's so weird because I've got my like phases. I know last year on the podcast continuously, I was like, I'm moving more towards TV than movies. Like that was so it was movies, then I moved to TV last year. This year's my reading year, apparently. So I'm just like cycling through my different ways to consume pop culture. But here we are. Let's not digress from the main event here. I don't think, as far as what we're watching, that's the usual segment here. I know we talked about Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We both finished that, so
Yes.
I big fans. Lots of exciting stuff there. Would love it as a standalone miniseries. Potential for more. Potential for spinoff with different characters. Who's to say? Um, and then for me, I'm watching Abbott Elementary season 3. Airing
Okay.
live on
I still got
Wednesdays.
to watch that.
Very funny. I'm very much into this new season. They're back after the delay of the writers' strike, so they kind of had to jump forward in the timeline a little bit, but they played it off. It was funny. It was very meta the way they like it's mockumentary style, similar to like Parks and Rec or The Office. Um, and they played it off as the camera crew got robbed in Philly and all their equipment was stolen. So there's just like a chunk of time that they didn't have cameras to film the staff with. So that worked out well for them. But
Yeah.
on the big screen, Dune Part Two is all it is. Johnny, I don't know if you've got anything before we dive in, but I'm ready for the sandworm if you are.
Yeah, well, I'll mention just real quick as like shout outs. Yes, I really, really liked Mr. and Mrs. Smith season one. So highly recommend that. I mean, I've only watched really one new season of anything in the first couple months of the year, but definitely one of the standout shows that I've heard about and actually given time to so far. And I'm deciding what we're going to get into. Well, Shogun with Hulu and FX, that is definitely the next show, and the reviews are like through the roof impressive, like the TV equivalent of Dune happening right now in that kind of setting. So I'm excited to get into that, but not too much outside of that. It's really been a Dune-a-palooza. So yeah, I think it's appropriate that we go ahead and dive in.
Let's do it. Dune Part Two is here. It's the second act to Denis Villeneuve's defining sci-fi space epic. We got Part One back in 2021. We were supposed to get Part Two in 2023. It delayed to 2024. The wait has been worth it, my friend, because here we are. And you've seen it twice now. I've seen it once. We're both booked for another showing on Thursday night of this week. So it is we are in full Dune mode. Let me set the stage, Johnny, and then I'll let you take it away because, like I said, this is your baby here. Let me get the cast down here. You know, if you thought that the star-studded cast was just insane in the first part, it just even gets even better here. I guess we do lose Oscar Isaac, unfortunately, but
Yeah, we lost a
that's
couple, we gained a couple. So
so true. Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Dave Bautista, Stellan Skarsgård, and Charlotte Rampling are all back. And then we've got Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, Lea Seydoux, and Anya Taylor-Joy with a surprise appearance. So lots of young stars, Hollywood legends, everybody coming together to make up this brilliant cast. This is sort of unprecedented here as we get into the scores, because we're sitting at this movie hasn't even come out as of our recording. You'll be listening to this once it is out, but as of our recording, it hasn't come out. So there's no audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. There's been the fan first screening, so plenty of people have seen it, but not enough. 97% critic score. It is now the highest rated movie on IMDb with, I believe, a 9.4, 9.5. 4.5 on Letterboxd, which is pretty unheard of. I have not finalized my out of 100 score, Johnny, because I need to see it this second time. Because I'm right up there, borderline 100. We'll see. But I want to confirm after that second viewing that we are, you know, it's not hype is the mind killer. We can't just have it all be hype.
sure.
Which I absolutely do not think it is, but I just want to make sure, like, on rewatch, does it hit the same? Does it hit better? What am I picking up on? Is the pacing different for me now that I know what's happening? Those sort of like fine-tuning details to solidify that score. And
Yeah.
I'm saying that because this is such a high score. I know it's going to be, because, like, you know, when I get out of Madam Web or Anyone But You, or like just like a regular movie, Argyle, I'm able to just like give it that score because, like, it's standard. But
Just
like
another one.
I just want to be so particular with this being such a prestigious film. I don't know if you've seen it twice, so you may have a score at the ready. I know you gave it 5 stars in the
Oh yeah.
Inside the Film Room website review, which, if you need more details after Johnny's epic podcast that's coming up, go check it out on the website. But Johnny, what is the score here?
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, we should note that, of course, some of these scores may go down. Who knows by how much once more people get involved. But I mean, the Rotten Tomatoes score launched at a 95%, and it literally only went up. It went up to 98, and it's now sat at 97, and it has like it's close to like 170 reviews or something. So I don't see that really going down very much at all. And the letterbox, as you mentioned, is sitting at a 4.5. It's the 5-star rating so far and away the most out of any of the ratings, and it's on the top 250 for Letterboxd. It's 3 spots behind Return of the King, talking about sequels. And then it's 2 spots currently ahead of last year's Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse. And then it's also 3 spots ahead of The Dark Knight, which it's gotten a lot of Dark Knight comparisons as of late. I think that's totally
Good
fair and
company.
fine. And yeah, very good company, totally fair and fine and justified, in my opinion. I will say I'm very curious to hear what you think, what you notice, or if anything changes for you on the second round. For myself, and for pretty much anyone else I've talked to or heard or seen comments from online or whatnot that has seen it multiple times now, um, it does get better when you watch it again. So, I mean, I'm pretty locked in at like a 98, maybe out of 100. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that there's certain little things as a book reader that maybe I would have appreciated being different or like approached with a slightly different way just because it's so dissimilar to the book. But in terms of a movie, like if you didn't know anything about the book and you just go in and watch it as a film on its own, I mean, it's essentially perfect. I mean, there's really not a whole lot here in terms of technical writing, performance. It just at every level, like it's pretty much like 5 out of 5. So maybe a 1 or 2 points for Room of Air, but yeah, I mean, I'm right up there.
We love to hear it. It's always more fun when we're on the same page, and I couldn't see this one going any other way, man. This is just a master class of filmmaking, and I'm excited to break it all down. Let me set the stage here per Rotten Tomatoes. Dune Part 2 will explore the mythic journey of Paul Atreides as he unites with Chani and the Fremen while on a warpath of revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the known universe, he endeavors to prevent a terrible future only he can foresee. All right, Johnny, where do we start?
Man, I wish I could tell you. So that summary is, I think, pretty appropriate, but it's certainly a blockbuster style
Mm-hmm.
sounding, which to be fair, this is a blockbuster movie. It cost almost $200 million. It's going to make about $200 million worldwide when it opens up later this week. And that's amazing. That's great. And I expected that, and I can't wait to see how it does. But this movie, and for anyone that's read the book, they already know this, but even for people that have seen maybe just the first movie or just are vaguely familiar with it, I don't think you can really anticipate just how dark and uh, really complex and nuanced a lot of the different elements of this movie are. It certainly accomplishes a lot in terms of spectacle and in terms of like what makes a great cinematic experience. I mean, this is one of, if not the best movie in terms of experience that I've seen like in a theater. I mean, I can only think of maybe a handful of others, including the first Dune, and like Blade Runner 2049 and some of Christopher Nolan's movies, maybe the 2 Avatar movies, but just that really know you're in the hands of a filmmaker that really knows how to craft an image and how to, really utilize sound in a really exciting, interesting, meaningful way. The score and how that is melded into the soundscape of the film. I mean, there's really, for me, I've seen it once in Dolby, which was the first time at the press screening, and then the second time was in IMAX. IMAX, I mean, Dolby's great, especially for sound. I think it's really tough to beat. I thought the sound was even, if not better, it was certainly louder in IMAX, I think.
Oh, my seat
Um,
was rumbling, brother.
I mean,
I was
my sheet,
vibrating. I
my
didn't know if
seat.
it was the Dune popcorn bucket next to me, if he got a special one, or if it was the sound, but we were moving.
Oh my gosh. No, it was definitely not just the bucket. It was, yeah, I mean, it was nuts. I mean, I can't think of very many other films, if any, that literally shook my seat and shook the theater. It was, and not just in even a single moment, in multiple moments, I would say. Um, and it was, I mean, it was just such an experience. And when you see it in IMAX with the expanded aspect ratio, I didn't get that on the first go around. And the Dolby I saw it in was a great auditorium, but it wasn't very big, and it didn't have even, I think even for a Dolby auditorium, it didn't have like one of the bigger screens, like the bigger presentation. So to see it on IMAX, and I'm still waiting to see opening weekend. I am going to get the chance to see it at a true 143 IMAX aspect ratio theater. So I'm really, really excited to see it in that format. But even just in a, what some people might call Limax or like 1:9 aspect ratio, it was genuinely like breathtaking. And I think on multiple occasions, and I said this on Twitter recently, just from the images alone, like even if you take away the score, if you take away sound, I mean, I got just goosebumps and chills like up and down on multiple occasions just from the images. But obviously with the score and all the effects, added into that, yeah, it was pretty euphoric. I guess is like the best way to put it. And again, we're talking about sensory, right? We're talking about the images, we're talking about the score. The score, somehow, I think, I listened to it. So I saw the movie on Tuesday last week at the press screening. The score came out Friday. And I think while I worked Friday, I listened to the whole score, like front to back, probably like 4 or 5 times, I think.
Same. It was
Um,
my like my Spotify day lists are now like suggesting all Dune and Hans Zimmer, and like my number one on my replayed list is Kiss the Ring. So
Oh man, yeah, I love that. I love that, love that. But yeah, no, I think we're in the same boat there. But it was nice because I got to, if I didn't get the chance to go to the press screening, I probably wouldn't have been able to control myself. I probably would have listened to the score like you did. But I'm grateful that I got to go to the press screening, see it, not really be familiar with the music, and then I could listen to it through and through, kind of remember which scenes, which like images come into my head. And then I got to see the movie again on Sunday, same as you, and I kind of had a fresh context, and I was kind of more anticipating the music, which I like, after you've seen it at least the first time. But yeah, the score, I mean, uh, better somehow, I think, than part one. And part one, to its credit, establishes the sound of Dune. It establishes certain motifs,
mhm.
certain themes. You can't, knock that by any stretch of the imagination. And it won, Hans Zimmer his second Oscar. It's an incredible accomplishment. But I think the way it felt like him and Villeneuve and Greg Fraser and the costume department and the production design, I feel like every department just felt so much more empowered to experiment in part two and to take more risks in terms of design, in terms of sounds that they wanted to try. Yeah, and I think that just really top to bottom bleeds through the entire picture, and I think that elevates the film in a way that part one's incredible, and part one is a masterpiece in my opinion, and this movie beats it in every way,
Mhm.
I think. I'm sure you felt similarly about that, but do you have any specific kind of points to that?
No, I fully agree. Like I think I know we just saw part one again in the IMAX release. Like I know I had
Hmm.
mentioned it when we were talking about that, of like doing a like back to back sort of screening to really get the full picture, because it
Yeah.
does, like you're saying, it does like so perfectly build and enhance on everything, like story wise, but also as you're mentioning, like the increase in the production design and the costumes and the score, to see it like transform into this second part. But I think that like I know one of the things that like Denny had said was like making sure that this movie stands alone. Like it's part two, but it also like stands alone for like a person who's just going to see this, which like I don't know why you would do that, but I would not I mean, you can go see this and still be entertained, but like to actually have it mean anything and hit, you obviously have to see the first
Yeah,
one.
I
Um,
agree.
but I think that this like hit all of those boxes as being like its own perfect masterpiece. But when you take it into consideration of like the larger picture of part one and part two, and then eventually Messiah, like it's unreal.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too. It is such a great compliment to part one, and it completes that novel in terms of story. But and I reiterated this a lot again online already in our chat. But part two, not only is it better in pretty much every way, but it's so different, I feel. Like I said, it just feels so much more experimental, so much more free in terms of the styling of the film. And I think that you feel that also in the way that the story really flows and the actors on screen, they feel like they have more kind of latitude to try, pretty experimental things, like pretty bold things in terms of their acting choices. Um, I guess speaking of which, we should talk a little bit about the performances, obviously, but overall, I think, the what gets you in the theater, what gets a lot of people in the theater anyway, general audience especially, is the spectacle, is the technical quote unquote elements of the movie. And I don't think a single person that goes to see this movie is going to be disappointed in that regard whatsoever. But
Absolutely.
I think what people are not necessarily anticipating as much, even people who have been very vocal online, critics and other film journalists have said, I didn't really care for part one, or I appreciated part one, or I respected, the craft and whatnot, but I couldn't really get into the characters, couldn't really get into the story. It just felt incomplete. And time after time already in the last couple of weeks, we've seen those people follow up that statement, the first statement with, but I loved part two, or part two is incredible. It's
Hmm.
fantastic. And that's because you get the complete story. And also, I think just generally speaking, the performances are even more impressive. I think the writing of the characters, I think Villeneuve has an even stronger hand in terms of how to develop the characters, give them, their own appropriate amount of screen time, their appropriate amount of play or development, individually, but also like kind of off of one another. There's a lot of like parallels between certain characters, or just really fun dynamics that they kind of play with across the board. So I think just that is what people maybe won't expect, or maybe will be even happier with than they otherwise thought, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, I think one great example that we can kind of talk off rip, and you had a great hit tweet, Zach, coming out of the theater related to this character. But Stilgar, Javier Bardem, will just mention as I think a key example. He has very little screen time in the first movie. He literally shows up for two scenes, doesn't have a ton of dialogue. He has his face kind of covered for part of it, and he strikes you as like he has a gravitas to him. He has, certainly a presence when he walks in the room. He does have kind of a humorous moment in terms of kind of a fish out of water between him and the Atreides when they have that face-to-face meeting.
Hmm.
But he also, you can tell he's honorable, and he, wants to kind of do the right thing, quote unquote, whatever that means in the desert, which can be very different from our lives. But here he really is serves as like comedic relief for a lot of the film, at least the first half of the film. Um, he is and Javier Bardem, we all know, is an incredibly talented actor. And I think when he was cast, I was like, oh man, that's such a good choice. Like I can really see that working. But what I didn't see coming was again that comedic element, and that Javier Bardem can even play that kind of humor. I
He was
thought worked really
hysterical.
well. I mean, he had the entire theater. I mean, all of like 500 people like laughing like together off of just certain lines, certain intonations, facial expressions. Like he was just really crushing it. And it's interesting because Villeneuve, his direction is he walks such a fine line. I genuinely don't know. This is easily, I would think, his funniest movie. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you've been rewatching some of his movies, but to me, this is like the most outwardly like humorous. Um,
Absolutely.
and so I can't remember, there's not a whole lot of laughs in the theater when I saw Arrival or 2049, or even the first Dune. But here it's incredible because he does that. But then on the flip side, this is arguably, I mean, he's done rated R movies, he's done really disturbing, material in the past. But this is one of his darkest movies for sure. In terms of thematics, if nothing else, in terms of, violence or what you actually see on screen is maybe a different matter. But it's just the way he really just oscillates between these totally different ends of the spectrum was just so impressive. Like again, I said this even after we saw the preview after the first Dune reissued, and we saw the worm riding scene. It just feels
Hmm.
like he leveled up in this film, and like right before our eyes, basically. Because his tonal control was so strong. And Javier Bardem's Stilgar, I think, was a perfect example because as funny as he was, and the humor comes from a couple things. He's kind of like a surrogate father in some ways to Paul, so he has like a really kind of lovely back and forth banter with him at times. And some of it's almost like he's like an older dad who doesn't really quite know like how to communicate or like connect with his
Yeah.
son. And then on the other side of the humor is he is such a strong believer in terms of his faith around the Lisan al-Gaib, and this figure that's supposed to come as like a messiah to lead the Fremen. And he believes that Paul is this figure. And so with the way he is so adamant and fervent in that belief, it's played.
Anything that happens is a result of that belief. And
Yes. Yeah.
he absolutely like eats that up, as far as just like, we all know that like, oh, that's not what happened, that's just like Paul being Paul, or that like that happened for a completely different reason. But then he's the one that is like, of course it
Yeah,
happened
fucking
because he's Muad'Dib, he's the Lisan al
dude.
Gaib.
Oh my God.
My favorite line that he had was when the sandworm came up and he goes, "It's right behind me, isn't it?" Kidding,
Uh,
kidding, because this is, I think that's a perfect example of like,
yeah,
in a big blockbuster movie, when we say that it's funny, like I feel like that's what we've been conditioned to think of as far as like
yeah.
how to work humor into blockbusters, is like cringy sort of I'll say it, like marvelization of jokes, like what once worked for them and then became like very oversaturated. But instead, this is like, we're not just like stuffing jokes in here to lighten the mood. It is like everything serves the plot. Everything like is in
Mhm.
character. It's not just like a quip or a one-liner, but instead like something that is very true and earnest to who the characters are. Um,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think it works too, like not even just in the dialogue, but I know like when you and I were talking after the movie, that like that opening sequence where we get the Fremen still moving through the
Oh man.
desert, transporting
Oh.
Jamis's body, and they get ambushed by the Harkonnen soldiers, and like you said like we both had the same sentiment, but you were the one who said it, of like, that's when I knew like that we were cooking with something different here, as far as
Yeah.
like the the soldiers floating up to like on all different, like in every element, at every level, like the like orange hue, the Fremen, not the Fremen like hiding and going into their like ambush mode, the soldiers floating up
Mhm.
in this like completely, we previously saw the Sardaukar like drift down, but to see these guys like fly up onto the
Yeah.
rock formation and then the just absolutely brutal attack. But like, to balance that out at the exact same time with like the humor of Paul and Jessica down at the bottom of the formation, and
Mhm.
bodies are falling left and right in like the midst of this brutal attack, like the theater is chuckling because of that.
Yeah.
um it it's just like you said, he's leveled up across the board on every facet.
That's such a great point, Zach. I like that you isolated that opening sequence because it is like when you're watching a movie that you know is about to be one of your favorite movies and you know it's going to be a masterpiece, like there's usually that scene or that moment very early. It could be the very first scene, could be in the first 5, 10 minutes, but you know you're watching something where you're like, wow, like I had this expectation, or maybe you didn't even have an expectation. In this case, obviously our expectations were very high, but you are experiencing it and you're noting like, oh, like you're clocking, oh, that, look at that, that's this certain way that I didn't expect. That's funny. That's awesome. Like it just all those different things. And you're like, it just kind of hits you that, yeah, no, this is going to be what I hoped for, if not even better. And I think that, yeah, that opening scene visually, sonically, tonally, action, dialogue, like it's a perfect function. And speaking of that scene, I'm just like kind of, I'm my mind is just all over the place. But there's the opening shot when Paul opens his eyes. Like that shot goes on for like a minute. or like a minute and a half, and like the camera like moves up and down like the dune, and like you see people like running back and forth, and they're like rolling over, and Stilgar pops up on the other side afterwards. Like it's just so it was so controlled and so masterful. And in terms of the humor, this came up into my mind when you were talking about the marvelization of just the way, because on paper, the stuff with Stilgar isn't necessarily funny. Like it's not, if you were just
It's
reading
not
it,
played that way in the book at all, if I remember
no,
correctly.
no, it's definitely not. So if you just had the script and you're reading it, you're not thinking, oh, like, haha, like it's plays more as like, oh, okay, like these people are really like fervent in their like belief. But it's kind of, it's almost satirical in how it, approaches like fanaticism and, what people will convince themselves of when they have a certain belief and they are really trying to make sure that their worldview isn't going to be shattered potentially, or impacted one way or another, whatever the situation is. So it's really interesting that they play it that way. But in terms of the humor, I guess I should shout out one of my other favorite movies that we've talked about in the last couple of years, because it's probably the closest comparison I can think of. But The Batman is very long, very dark, disturbing at points, and it doesn't sacrifice any of that, but it has some really great humor as well, in terms of not just the dialogue being quote unquote funny, but the character interactions, the way certain lines are played, facial expressions, things like that. So I think that, yeah, when you really get a good balance in the screenplay, like that does make a difference. But it's not just the screenplay, it's the direction, it's the performance. And I think Javier Bardem as Stilgar was just such a standout. But I guess I'll kind of roll off of him into the next couple characters that I wanted to touch on. But the thing is, with all that humor, all the levity that we just explained, in the back half of the movie, it's still that same fanaticism, it's still that same fervor from Stilgar, but it becomes like disturbing and like
Hmm.
dark and unsettling, I guess is the way to put it. Because it's not like haha anymore. It's like ha, like like you're like it's kind of hitting you like what's happening here, without going too deep into it. So that was just really, I thought, like masterfully done. And I thought he did a fantastic job. Obviously he is following, and uh that performance stands on its own so impressively, but it's also kind of playing off and in the service of Timothy Chalamet as Paul. I mean, Paul was the backbone of the first movie, basically a co-lead with Rebecca Ferguson in the first movie in a lot of ways. Here, he is the guy. I mean, there's other characters that get a lot of screen time, but it is really his story, at least through the first like half or two-thirds maybe of the film. And then the narrative focus kind of jumps back and forth a little bit more. Um, but man, I like Timothy Chalamet a lot as a performer, and I think he's incredible in Call Me by Your Name. I mean, I think it's like kind of an iconic performance, like a star-making performance. I liked him a lot in the first movie. I liked him a lot in Wonka, um, Bones and all. He's just Little Women is, I think, one of his best performances. But here, I mean, Zach, were you at all like, I know you like Chalamet as well for the most part, maybe not as much as I do, but how did you feel? Like, were you expecting him to like hit all the notes that he does in this? Like, what was the expectation versus how you felt watching him, especially in the like latter half or last third of the movie or so?
It's interesting because I know, seeing Wonka, I had texted um in the group that like Chalamet's got the juice. Like we all knew that he was like a movie star already,
Yeah,
being sought after for these roles. But I think it was Wonka that really opened my eyes of being like, this guy can play any sort of character. We've seen him be Bones and All, a cannibal. We've seen him be, Little Women and like a classic man. We've seen him be Paul Atreides. It's the range. There's nothing that he can't do, and so to go from that back to this like so quickly, I I was not surprised, but I was still like continuously impressed because the character of
yeah,
Paul grows so much in the course of this movie, and
yeah,
the performance is so different, going from like that reluctance in the first part of this movie to then be someone who is like calling the shots or silencing the Reverend Mother, you know, standing his ground there, fighting, facing off against Fade Routha and Austin Butler. It's just, there's so many different elements to this performance, and the transformation from even the beginning of part one, but just like the beginning of this movie. Chalamet, like I said, was not surprised, but just extremely impressed and validated in my confidence in him, because he's got the juice, Johnny.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're in pretty strong agreement there. I mean, I was expecting him to nail it, but I mean, I think anyone who's maybe been skeptical of him as a performer, or maybe not really loved any of his performances, um, I really find it hard to believe that anyone will watch this movie and come away thinking, nah, I didn't really buy him. I don't see the hype. Like, I'm not saying you need to praise him at every turn, obviously. I mean, he's very successful already on his own, but even as much as I was expecting it to be great, I mean, when he when he marches in to give the speech in this movie at the end, and when he's giving the speech, I mean, it's like I can't really think of another moment like that I've seen, at least like in a recent movie, where one character is just in a room full of, you know, dozens or hundreds, at least, you know, in the actual filming of it. In the movie, it's like thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I just can't think of someone, especially this young, who goes in and like totally commands the screen, commands the room. I mean, I felt like he was like just bursting through the screen at that point, and like it was just magnetic. Um, which I mean, that's just a huge testament to him, because I don't think he's really done something quite like this before, and I think he did just fantastic, and the physicality as well, I think, is a big part of it. You know, it's not like he bulked up for this movie or anything like that. He kind of just did his own thing, but he has that I guess kind of gravity to him, and I think that's really really impressive.
You know who
Um,
did bulk up? Austin Butler, man.
Yeah, that was what I was going to go to next. So definitely different approaches to their performances, to their characters in this movie. I think the first the first time I watched the movie, Chalamet and Butler were definitely my like standouts, my top two. But having seen the movie again, I think Bardem, Zendaya, and Ferguson are even stronger and stand out just as much. But yes, I think as great as Chalamet is in the lead kind of quote unquote, hero or protagonist role, Austin Butler rises to the occasion, and uh yeah, he bulks up. He's absolutely shredded. Like, it's crazy. And he is so like, I don't, so tell me, because already gave you my reaction privately, but I'll go a little bit more into it. But tell me, when he's introduced in the movie, like, what's going through your head? What are you thinking as the sequence plays out? Like, obviously we'd seen a lot of promo material with him. We'd seen him do interviews. We heard about the process and like how the character was expected to be portrayed. But when you're actually watching him inhabit the character and like perform, like, I guess, what were your initial impressions on top of, how you ended up feeling about the character overall, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like, when is, so we first see him when he's like getting prepared for the arena, right? And he's
Yeah.
like, we get like the shirtless shot, he's getting his bag painted, and he uh like slits the throats of his assistants, right? Um
Mhm.
it's I was shocked at how, like you said, we'd seen the snippets of him in promo, but that was all like mainly just to like show you like the look of him.
Yeah.
And you didn't really have like a grasp of what the actual character was like. I was shocked at how like charming he, like, not in like a, I don't know the right way to say this. He's like charming, and like he's still, that's just like Austin Butler, and like
Yeah.
being, obviously he wasn't doing his Elvis voice, but like that sort of like charm as like this psychopathic, like no remorse, no empathy killer.
Yeah.
And it's been, I haven't read the book since 2020, so it's been a long time for me. But just to like be the duality of like seeing a trailer of him like screaming as we get that shot in the like in the
Mhm.
actual fight, to then be like smooth talking with Lady Finrig. Like
Yeah.
it's it's wild the character that's put on here, and Austin Butler is so just like oozing charisma, as evil as it can be though. And like that presence, that physicality as he's like in the arena, just decimate, like toying with his prey basically. Even when the game is rigged against him. It's it's something to see, man.
Yeah.
I was all about that. It's crazy because like he doesn't have like a ton of screen time to
No,
be
he
like
doesn't.
heralded as such a, you know, iconic epic villain, like instantaneously to be compared to like Heath Ledger Joker or Darth Vader or something like that. I'm like, it's I don't know if I would go that far that quickly, especially with
Yeah.
like we can't ever, like he's dead, he gets killed in this movie, like you can't, this is the extent of what we're going to get from him versus like a Darth Vader or something over the course of
Right.
multiple movies, or the history of the Joker and Heath Ledger being like one iteration of it. But I think for what this particular character is, he's like everything you could want from it. And to go up against, you're talking about like Timothy Chalamet not bulking up and just like him having that presence, like this is a very different kind of presence, and it's
Yeah.
equally impressive and intimidating.
Yeah, no, I think you summed that up really well. I wouldn't go that far either in terms of like putting him on the level of like that those villains necessarily. However, I will say I understand the comparison for one thing because this movie's like fucking incredible, and like I understand like this is in that realm of like the Dark Knight or Empire, whatever you want to say. Um, but I think a good comparison there is the Joker comparison for the simple fact that Heath Ledger and Austin Butler, both, extremely good looking guys, super suave, super charismatic, off camera in real life, in the public eye. But the way they were able to transform into those grimy, disgusting, like just disturbing freaks. and and yet there is some level of charisma and some level of like allure that still comes through and like grips you. And it's again, part of that does come down to the direction. Like I don't know how they ride that line so well, but just the performance for the performer to really understand what the movie is calling for and in what capacity that role is in the larger context of the movie, what they can bring to it to make it stand out. As you said, Fade doesn't have that much screen time, but because of how Austin Butler approached this character, the way he brought it to life, in combination with the design of the character and everything else, it really does like leave like a huge impression. Um, I think for me, like when I mean the whole, let's say for one moment, the whole Getty Prime sequence though, like everything that happens there is so stunning. So many cool visuals, so many interesting concepts. There's a black sun that you see literally in the sky over their
The
planet.
fireworks
Um,
were so cool.
ink blot fireworks.
It
I
was giving
mean,
a rival.
yeah, I mean, come on, man. I mean, it's so visually just mind-blowing. And then also there's the sound of the arena, there's horns going on, there's the Harkonnen Arena track from Hans Zimmer is oh man, it might be my favorite. I mean, certainly in the top 3 or 4, I would say. Um, one detail that you may not have like noticed, or it took me like a second watch to really appreciate it, understand it. But the Bene Gesserit, when they come out, there's the shot where you watch them in the shot go from quote unquote color indoors in their typical all black gowns and headdress and everything. And they walk out, and in the shot, they turn white and they're like so stark white sitting out in the sun. Um, and it's such a ghostly, like haunting kind of contrast and image. I just thought that was really cool. But yeah, when he comes out, I mean, the score is booming, and he kind of just like he offs the first two guys so easily because they're drugged, and then he gets into this contest with this guy. And I think when it really hit me, and I like had to clock in my brain that it really was Austin Butler and remind myself of that, is when he like, I think he kills like the first or second guy, and then he turns to go, tackle the next one. And he like, I don't even, he does like this little, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like a little like roar or like a grunt that he does, like just like twists his head like an animal. It was so freaky. I just thought that he clearly was like really going all in, like just totally going for it. And also when he gets into the contest with the undrugged gladiator or slave, he is like twisting the knife and they like stand up together and like he's really enjoying it and he's like drooling like onto the ground like as they're like coming up. It was just very like animalistic, and I think that played really really well. Um so yeah, that was a huge impression. Then of course when he does finally come face to face with Paul, when they have their kind of showdown, and even when he comes face to face with some of the other like huge actors in this film, I loved his moments that he had with the Baron. I thought that they played off each other in a really fun way. He has a
Bautista.
pretty Bautista, yeah, they have a good scene together where you I think that's a great scene because it really plays up the contrast of those two characters. Maybe on the surface it's easy to just think of the Harkonnens as all the same or like kind of lump them together because they all seem so inhuman and so brutal and violent.
It's also
But
interesting to see like in the first movie, like Beast is so like he is like the, I guess, below the Baron. He's like the embodiment of like the Harkonnens and like their evil and violence. And like
mhm.
you think that he is like this brutal monster. And even in this movie, we still see him like smash the guy's face in on the computer panel.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but then to like meet this version of him that is like so much more toned down, but also so much more evil and like vile with like Fade, and like the way he just like slits random people's throats and like can put even Raban like in his place is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, exactly. It is so, and it makes it even smarter to me that they left Fade out of part one, because not only do you get to kind of like hold that off as like a treat basically for part two, but you do set up Raban as like this brutal, he kind of he's like a brute that just kind of presides over the things happening on Arrakis, and he's in this, it's just really emphasized, which is true to the book, is that he's just not intelligent. He's dumb.
He's
He's a
not a
brute.
strategic player. He is just an
He is not.
enforcer.
He is an enforcer. And he is always going to do the most obvious thing. He's just going to go ahead and go head first into combat. He's going to let his emotions get the best of him. And that's such a good contrast to Fade, because he is cold, calculating, quiet. He doesn't need to yell. He doesn't need to go running into battle. He has this, suave air about him, which is again the total opposite of Raban. So I liked that. I liked how they kind of played off each other in that way. And then Fade also obviously serves as a great kind of mirror in contrast to Paul, including with the way the Bene Gesserit try to manipulate him, take advantage of him. That's all things that we've seen Paul go through as well. And I just like that they really emphasized um, the connection there between the two. Is And they said this in the first movie, one of the early scenes after the ganja bar scene. They said, there are other prospects, and they say that, I think they
Mhm.
say that almost the exact same line in this before they introduce Fade. And I thought that was really appropriate. So really, really a huge fan of Austin Butler. I think would you say that he was the best new addition to the film? I know that we have some other actors we can touch on here, but
I think so. I feel like Florence Pugh and Christopher Walken are too far removed from like they're missing for, I know we talked about Austin Butler being like it's probably like 2 hours before you like get to him really in like any
yeah,
substantial way, but like the Irulan, is that how you say it? I can't.
Irulan.
Irulan is obviously like this is the equivalent of like Zendaya being in part one only to be like bigger in part two. Having read Messiah, like that
Yeah.
what we're introduced to here will then be like tenfold in the next movie. And so like I think you're just like, you know, teasing that, like setting the stage for more Florence Pugh. I'm trying to think who else. Anya Taylor-Joy is a small surprise, but a welcome one. I liked Leia Seydoux as Lady Fenrig, but I think it's got to go Butler as far as just who's the most impactful as the new members here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Leia Seydoux is really she makes a big impact as well. I really liked how they utilized her. But yeah, the other characters, the Carinos, you know, the Imperial family, they're great. Walken, I think he just has such a again a gravity about him, and he's such a legend that you believe him that at one point this guy was the most powerful person in the universe in his prime, but now he's old, he's declining, just like his empire is declining. And I think he it was great because again, he gives that impression of what he once was, but you get a glimmer of that, but you mostly see him as okay, he's kind of out of touch with what's going on. He's made some bad decisions, he's not been careful enough, and he's made miscalculations. So I thought that was well done. And then Irulan on the other side of that, she is being brought up to kind of replace him to some degree or another. And she is kind of quiet. She's just kind of like watchful. She asks, the right questions. She's probing. So I think all that was good setup. But as you said, yeah, it's not her show. She is more of a setup for the next film. But as Zendaya was set up as the next film with part one, she is like the co-lead in this movie effectively. She is the lead across from Chalamet. They spend a lot of time on screen together. She also gets this, some moments on her own, some really impactful shots and scenes. And I was really impressed with her. I mean, I wasn't skeptical or like hesitant or anything like that. I would say it was more like I was anxious to see how they were going to handle the romance, the relationship between those two. I don't think it's particularly special or like effective in the novel. Like the novel pretty much just throws them together. And frankly, no pun intended, but Herbert doesn't really make them like, or at least Chani, like much of a character. Like she doesn't have like a lot on the bone in terms of what she believes or what she wants or anything like that. She's pretty much just along for the ride. And so I really like the direction that Villeneuve took her on the page, but also in performance. And I think Zendaya really rose to the occasion. We know how talented she is. Obviously, we both really like her in Euphoria. I think she's great there. As a two-time Emmy winner to prove it. But here, in terms of films, I mean, I think this is far and away her best film performance that I've seen, at least.
I totally agree. I feel like there's such a warmth to what we get between the two of them that is not necessarily on the page, but that Zendaya and Chalamet help bring to life. And she goes into like this mentor, it like shifts from like a mentor role to the romantic role. But seeing them together and seeing her like help integrate him into the Fremen culture and society. I don't know the name of the character that was like Zendaya, like Chani's best friend,
Shishakli.
essentially.
Yeah.
Like seeing her like go from teasing him with her friend to then being like backing him up. It was a fun little journey to go on. But yeah, I mean, I think Zendaya and again, Rebecca Ferguson was like a star of the first one, but to see Jessica on this like dark, evil path, as she kind of like unravels and dives into like the fanaticism and the prophecy and just like leading this revolution. She's a completely different character to the like kind and caring mother that we rooted for in the first part.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout out. In terms of Chani and Paul, just before we move on, I talked about Jessica. I really liked their relationship. Again, I said I was maybe a little bit anxious about how it was going to be played, but I thought the two performers did a great job together. I think they have genuine, on-screen chemistry. I believed in, the platonic kind of relationship, the way it starts out. There's, good humor between them and everything, and then how it slowly develops. It's just that young love, situation. Anyone that's ever had a crush, when they're a teenager or something like that, how that feels, and you can definitely get that vibe from them through the time they spend together and the scenes they're given to develop that. I thought Villeneuve did a good job because, I mean, we haven't really seen him do that type of relationship before. He's done good stuff with romance in the past, but I think this is probably his best work in that regard. I mean, he's not a particularly romantic, filmmaker. It's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think of him, but I thought that he did a solid job. And Zendaya was just really, she was the character, having seen it a couple times now, she makes me the most like emotional, or like close to emotional anyway, watching the movie, because she really goes through some shit down the stretch anyway. And
Leaving the room, leaving the throne room.
yeah,
Devastating.
yeah, she is just like, and she plays it. She has some moments where she gets to kind of like speak her mind and like, elevate her position, elevate her point of view and speak on that. But she really does do a lot with just glances and facial expressions. So she does a really good job. And I think that if the romance doesn't work, it's hard for the movie to be as good as it is, I think. I think if that relationship is just not as convincing, if her performance isn't as convincing, the heart and the emotion in a lot of it is not going to be as productive, let's say. And I think that they really nailed it there. With the Fremen in general and how Jessica works with them, I mean, I think that might have been maybe my favorite part. I mean, there's so many favorite parts of this movie for me, but that first hour 20, 15 or so, I mean, you're pretty much just with the Fremen nonstop. And I think it's really effective because you're getting inundated with the Fremen way of life and their day to day, and also what it takes to survive for a long period of time in the desert with the Fremen. And you're experiencing it and living it just as Paul is. You're getting to go through these experiences kind of firsthand and learning and hearing and seeing so many different things. I think some people might think of it as slow. I didn't. I mean, I didn't think any part of this movie was slow. If anything, it went by too fast. I could have watched another extra 20, 30 minutes probably at least. But I thought all the stuff with the Fremen, because the Fremen are kept at such a distance and are so mysterious in part one, I was really hoping that they would go all the way with their culture. And I think that they did a really great job, differently from the book, even in how they differentiate the Fremen. There's like a diversity of thought, a diversity of appearance among the Fremen, in terms of like the religious, the political ideologies, things like that. And that's a huge part of the story. And I think that was really key because we talked about Stilgar earlier and his fanaticism and his kind of strong belief in Paul as a Messiah. Jessica, it's Rebecca Ferguson. I mean, she's one of the best actors, in my opinion, right now. I think ever since she came into being like in the spotlight in Rogue Nation, which was almost 10 years ago now, she has just impressed me like at every turn. And I think she's just done so many different styles of performance, styles of movies and roles. But this, I mean, you really, as you said, root for her in the first movie. I mean, she's a mother. She's like in a very hostile situation. She's out of her comfort zone. She's losing loved ones. She's trying to hold on to loved ones. Like it's a tough situation. And she's trying to be her own person because she's being controlled basically, or at least told what to do by the Bene Gesserit. And here, the water of life sequence, I mean, for one, I thought was just very finely crafted in terms of the score. I think that track, Water of Life, from the scores is really strong. Also, I think that the way they chose to visualize the change, I thought was really great. A lot of it does come down to Jessica and her physical transformation in the scene, and what Ferguson does. I don't know how much of it is real. I don't know how much of it is, if it's all performance or if there's any sort of like trickery going on. But I mean, she looks just scary in this. It's like a horror movie playing out in this scene, like she's becoming possessed. And
Hmm.
in a way, she
I,
kind of is.
I saw a comparison to Rosemary's Baby, and it's like
Mm.
obviously the baby element there, just with her being pregnant and Aaliyah, but like the sort of like unraveling, like she's still aware of what she's doing, but it's just
Oh
becoming
yeah,
more and more frantic and fanatic. But
yeah,
no, I think she's just like unhinging herself as he's walking around. She's like kind of playing into it because she wants this like allure and
yeah, exactly.
power over the Fremen. But like seeing her walk through the siege and just like mumble to herself as she's talking to Aaliyah is like terrifying but funny at the same time.
Yeah, and again, they really ride the line well in terms of like there's a moment where she's like says like quiet to Aaliyah. And I thought that like see they like play that for like humor, but in other moments they play it like really creepily. There's a moment that like the first time I saw it at least like sent chills down my spine, and that's when Jessica is leaving to go south and she's turning like saying goodbye to Paul, and she says like the last thing she says is like all of us or something like that. And it's not she didn't use the voice. It's like her and Alia or just all these voices of the Reverend Mother like speaking to Paul basically. It's really creepy. It's really, really well done. And Ferguson, I think, gives one of her best performances in this movie. And we've said that a few times out. I mean, I would say that same thing about Butler, Chalamet, Zendaya, Bardem. Um, it's just such an impressive ensemble. I think this is going to be one of the best ensembles of the entire year, I think. Um, so yeah, you expect the spectacle, you expect the visuals, but I really think the character work and the performances are up to that level. And I think the kind of last thing, at least that I want to explore, is something that I thought was really important for the movie to nail and stick the landing with. And if they didn't, I was going to be upset. I didn't ever expect them not to nail it, but in terms of the themes of the movie and its exploration of religion, politics, and how those things go hand in hand a lot of the time, or at least in this case. And, you know, there's the white savior trope or narrative, there's colonialism, all these different things, and how those they interweave and intersect. Um, you don't really expect, I mean, we're just coming off the back of Oppenheimer, which was such a political film. I mean, you hear and see a lot of things in that movie that you don't really see big budget studio movies talking about or mentioning. Um, and that was kind of impressive that audiences really responded to that or like were willing to engage with that or like listen to the narrative of what the story was doing. Um, and I think this movie similarly isn't dealing with a lot of not necessarily taboo subjects, but subjects that big, expensive movies don't really put too much focus on because they can be controversial, or it might be harder for audiences. You know, they don't think audiences are willing to engage with it or even hear certain things. So for me, I thought this movie just knocked it out of the park in pretty much every respect. When it came to talking about those different things, because they could have, and I'm not saying that's perfect in that regard. I think they could have gone even further in some areas. I think they could have been more bold in certain ways. But there are definitely a lot of like real world parallels in this movie with current events, historical events, um, ongoing conversations about, again, politics, religion. Like it's very much, it just proves like Frank Herbert was a genius to come up with this concept, this world, but also a lot of his political commentary is very interesting, still relevant today, obviously. Um, and I think that the movie just really, even though it does change a lot of things in terms of maybe certain characters, certain subplots, it really stays true to Dune in that key respect. And I think it really lands all those punches very well, in my opinion. And I think that it gives the audience, something to think about. Like it doesn't give you clear-cut answers. It doesn't give you a black and white perspective on anything. Like it's all very muddled. It's all very kind of provocative. Makes you want to talk about it or think about it. And I think, especially with the way the movie ends, it's for the characters, for the emotional element of the film, but also the philosophical or intellectual, quote unquote, part of the film. Like it's not a feel good movie. Like it's not. It ends in a very like
Mhm.
sick, like dark kind of manner. Even though it may not hit you over the head with that necessarily, like it does when you really
Like
stop and think about like, wow,
it's so fascinating because it's like we won. We beat like we beat the Emperor, like we took down the Harkonnens, and then you're like, wait, but what did we win? As you see Stilgar and the Fremen like loading the planes to go and like carry their war across the Imperium, and you
yeah,
see Chani having to grapple with the status of her life and her relationship as Irulan is like brought into the picture, and who is this man that she thought she loved, and the just the jihad that is looming despite Paul having talked so much about doing everything he can to prevent it.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's such a like, as the more you think about it, you're like, just what exactly do am I happy about? What am I feeling good about this ending?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great way of summarizing. And I think to your point, like what Villeneuve does in terms of perspective is so important. And so it's so interesting because and people were a little bit concerned or skeptical of how he was going to involve Chani and how he was going to focus her perspective in this film. But I think he did such a great job because in that second half or like the final third of the movie, Paul basically becomes something you cannot really relate to. He becomes this messianic figure and this very powerful figure. And Chani in the meanwhile is like an observer. Like she basically is forced into an outside position in her own culture because she doesn't agree with what's happening and she is conflicted because she loves Paul as a man and as a person, as a partner, but what he's doing in his role, um, you as he's giving his speech, it's like Villeneuve basically puts you in the perspective of someone who is kind of how he puts it in the movie. Like there are fervent, like fundamentalists, like believers, and then there are those that are skeptical. And you really get positioned with Stilgar as fundamentalist, and with Chani, you're one of the skeptics. And when he's giving that speech, I mean, Stilgar's eyes are watering. He's, falling to his knees. He's just in like a religious, kind of ecstasy. And you, as you're watching Paul, like you're getting caught up in it because it's so powerful. It's so well done. You feel like, okay, like, wow, like this could be good. Like this could be an interesting thing to do. Um, but then it cuts back to Chani and you see these reaction shots of Zendaya watching the speech play out, watching her, in dismay. And that's from that speech through to like the planning of the battle to the battle itself and then like the finale. Um, she is just kind of like can't believe like she kind of has to go along with it. And it's just easy to see how people do get swept up in these situations, not even necessarily through their own volition, but just because that's the way that the world turns, in that existence. So yeah, there's just so much to chew on. It's such a complex movie, more so than the first one. I mean, the first one is a lot. It's dense because you have to learn everything coming into, before you get to part two. But because you already are familiar with so many concepts and the characters and whatnot, you really get to enjoy and chew on the ideas and the thoughts, of Dune, I think, to a greater degree. And because there's that melding of thought and, discussion driving themes and plot points on top of all the amazing spectacle, on top of all the technical quote unquote achievements, and the performances and the action. I mean, we didn't even talk about the action. I mean, the action, it's like you kind of just assume it's going to be good, but it's even better than certainly better than part one. It's better than anything Villeneuve has ever done up to this point. And honestly, it's on par and I think better than a lot of like action that Nolan has done. It's more of like a Peter Jackson or um James Cameron, I think especially is a good comparison in terms of how he handles the action here. It's comparable to like the Avatar films, I think, in some ways. But yeah, I think just all like we were saying at the beginning of the show when we were giving the rating. I mean, it's a 98, 99 with some quibbles, maybe more book related than anything, out of 100 because it's such an all-encompassing, satisfying cinematic experience. And I don't think it's just going to be as a theatrical experience. Obviously, you should go catch this in IMAX or in Dolby, anywhere where you can see it big and loud. But I think it will last. I think the high ratings, the high scores that you're seeing everywhere right now isn't, some of it's, maybe high, excuse me, hyperbole. Um, but I really do think that this is going to be a movie people look back and, we're experiencing it, we're living through it now, but I think people are going to look back and be like, wow, like that really was an incredible like landmark. Like that's going to inspire filmmakers. It's going to inspire the genre. Hopefully it'll inspire some other blockbuster filmmaking we see in the next 5, 10 years, maybe. But yeah, it's an exciting time. And we know, there's going to be hopefully a part three, a Dune Messiah film. What else Villeneuve has in store for his career? I think this could just send him into the stratosphere, in terms of freedom and how, the resources he has. I really couldn't be happier. I couldn't be happier with the result in terms of the film and also just what it means, in the greater scope of things.
What a time, Johnny. We're fresh on the heels of Oppenheimer. We've gotten the year before The Way of Water, the Batman,
Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick. What a series of epic blockbusters we are in the midst of, and many more to come from Denis Villeneuve, hopefully with Dune Messiah. Script almost done. We're cooking. It's great. Any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
Nah, I think I really capped it off there. I hope everyone loves it as much as we did. Certainly going to be seeing it again. I'll probably, like I said, be living at the theater during the first half of March, or if not longer. But nah, I was just really, really happy. You wait a long time for these things. They come around, and when it lives up to your expectations, just feels great. And I'm just loving it. Just trying to drink it in and enjoy it. So yeah, it's a great time. But did you have anything last to add, Zach?
I think you crushed it. It's the cinematic event of the year, of the decade, of our lifetime, perhaps. You don't want to miss it before whatever you tweeted about it, whatever nonsense takes IMAX screens away from this in 3 weeks. Ghostbusters, poo-poo movie number 7. Like, it's go see it, like you said, big and loud while you can, because that's the best way to do it. I can't comprehend watching this on home release when that inevitably comes out. No, but it was everything I wanted it to be and more, and that's all I've got to say about that. But what an episode. It's been a long time coming, Johnny. I know we're fired up about it. Excited to head back to the theater for more. But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening week in and week out. If you follow us specifically for Dune content, thank you for all of that. We've still got a long way to go. I'm sure we'll still be talking about this upon several rewatches. And the road to Dune Messiah starts here, brother.
Yeah, you can say that again. Definitely appreciate all the support, everyone who listens, watches, reads. You can find my written review on the website now, insidefilmroom.com or filmroom. And I think that, yeah, we're going to be talking about this movie all year. I mean, this is going to be one of the very best, if not the best movie, 12 months from now. And I think looking back at, when we look back at 2024, and I'm sure I'll be writing, when I get to my Oscar preview for this next coming year, this will probably be in 11 or 12 of the categories, most likely, I would imagine, and we'll see if anything can keep up with it. I mean, this might be the Oppenheimer this year, who knows? But to stay tuned on all of that for the reviews and everything else, follow on Twitter, Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. You can catch all those accounts at Inside Film Room.
And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, iHeart, YouTube, anywhere you can find a podcast. We are there. And come back next week for all things Oscars. We'll see you then.